In the heart of ancient Ireland, as the last golden leaves fell from the sacred oak trees and the harvest moon hung heavy in the October sky, our ancestors prepared for a night unlike any other. This was not a time for celebration, as we might understand it today. This was a time of profound spiritual danger and otherworldly communion, a night when the very fabric of reality grew thin, when the dead walked among the living, and when the gods themselves descended to play their tricks upon mortal souls. Tonight, we journey back through the mists of time to uncover the true origins of the festival that would one day become Halloween. But this is not the story of carved pumpkins and candy-filled trick-or-treating that you know. This is the story of Samhain, the ancient Celtic festival that stood at the crossroads between life and death, between the world we know and the world we fear. This is the story of how our ancestors faced the darkness and learned to dance with spirits in the flickering light of sacred fires. What you are about to discover will forever change how you see October 31st. For hidden beneath the commercialized Halloween of today lies one of humanity's most profound and terrifying spiritual traditions. A tradition so powerful that it survived the rise and fall of empires, the conversion of entire peoples to Christianity, and the passage of nearly 2,000 years. The ancient Celts did not simply celebrate Samhain, they endured it, they navigated it, and for one night each year, they opened the door between worlds and invited the impossible into their lives. To understand the true meaning of Samhain, we must first understand the world in which it was born. Picture, if you will, the windswept hills and mysterious forests of ancient Ireland, Scotland, and the Isle of Man. This was a land where every grove held spirits, where every stream carried the whispers of the other world, and where the boundary between the natural and supernatural was as thin as morning mist. The Celtic peoples who inhabited these lands 2,000 years ago possessed a worldview that was fundamentally different from our own. They did not see death as an ending, but as a transformation. They did not fear the darkness, but understood it as a necessary part of the cosmic cycle. Their year was divided not into 4 seasons as ours is, but into 2 great halves. The bright half, ruled by summer and light, and the dark half, governed by winter and shadow. And at the precise moment when one gave way to the other, when the wheel of the year turned from light to darkness, came Samhain. The name itself, pronounced Samhain or Samhain in the ancient tongue, means simply summer's end. But this simple translation barely hints at the cosmic significance the Celts attached to this moment of transition. Samhain began at sunset on October 31st and continued through the following day, for in the Celtic understanding of time, each new day began not with the dawn, but with the setting of the sun. This timing was no accident. The festival occurred at the precise midpoint between the autumnal equinox and the winter solstice, when the power of darkness was growing strongest and the light was in full retreat. It was a moment of perfect balance, when the year itself held its breath, suspended between what was and what was to come. But Samhain was more than just a marker of seasonal change. It was a liminal festival, a threshold celebration that acknowledged the fundamental truth that certain times and places exist outside the normal order of things. The Celts understood that there were moments when the usual rules of reality simply did not apply, when the impossible became possible and the dead could return to walk among the living. Samhain was the most powerful of these moments, a night when time itself lost all meaning, and the past, present, and future collapsed into a single eternal now. The heart of Samhain lay in the Celtic belief that on this night, the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead grew gossamer thin. The boundary that normally kept the 2 realms separate became porous, allowing spirits, ancestors, and otherworldly beings to cross freely between dimensions. This was not seen as a terrifying supernatural invasion, but as a natural and necessary part of the cosmic order. The Celts did not fear death as an ending, but understood it as simply another form of existence, and Samhain was the annual opportunity for the living and the dead to maintain their eternal connections. At the center of Samhain's spiritual significance stood the Aossi, the spirits or fairies of Celtic mythology. These were not the tiny, delicate creatures of children's fairy tales, but powerful and sometimes dangerous beings who inhabited the other world. Most scholars believe the Aossi were the mythological descendants of the Tuatha De Danann, the ancient gods of Ireland, who had retreated into the hidden places of the earth when the mortal world changed. During Samhain, these beings emerged from their realm to walk freely in the world of mortals, bringing with them both blessings and dangers that required careful management through proper ritual observance. The festival also served as a crucial time for honoring and communing with deceased ancestors. Unlike our modern Halloween, which treats death as something spooky and frightening, Samhain embraced death as a continuation of family relationships. The spirits of dead relatives were not ghostly apparitions to be feared, but beloved family members returning for their annual visit. Families would set extra places at their dinner tables, prepare favorite foods of the departed, and leave their doors open to welcome the returning souls of their ancestors. This was not mere superstition, but a profound expression of the Celtic belief that family bonds transcended the boundary between life and death. The physical preparations for Samhain were as elaborate as the spiritual ones. Central to these preparations was the lighting of great communal bonfires, which served multiple crucial functions in the festival's observance. These were not ordinary fires, but sacred flames kindled by the Druids, the priest-magicians who served as the spiritual leaders of Celtic society. The word bonfire itself derives from these ancient practices, coming from bone fire, for the Celts would cast the bones of slaughtered livestock into the flames as offerings to ensure the survival of their communities through the harsh winter months ahead. The most significant of these sacred fires was lit at Tlachtga, known today as the Hill of Ward in County Meath, Ireland. This ancient site, which recent archaeological investigations have confirmed was used for ceremonial purposes for over 3,000 years, served as the spiritual centre of Samhain celebrations throughout Ireland. According to the 17th century chronicler Geoffrey Keating, it was at Tlachtga that all the fires of Ireland would be ritually extinguished, and from the great ceremonial fire lit by the assembled Druids, new flames would be carried to rekindle every hearth across the land. This coordinated lighting and extinguishing of fires created a powerful sense of spiritual unity, binding together communities across vast distances in a shared moment of death and rebirth. The symbolism of fire during Samhain went far beyond mere practical considerations. As the nights grew longer and the sun's power waned, fire represented humanity's defiance against the encroaching darkness. These flames were humanity's promise that light would return, that life would continue, and that the community would survive the trials of winter. The fires also served as beacons for the returning spirits, guiding the souls of the dead back to the homes they had known in life, and providing protection against any malevolent forces that might seek to exploit the thinning of the veil between worlds. The casting of animal bones into these fires served multiple purposes in the ancient Celtic worldview. On a practical level, it was a way of disposing of the remains of livestock that had been slaughtered as part of the harvest season preparations for winter. But symbolically, it represented the offering of life force itself to the gods and spirits, a sacrifice made to ensure the continued prosperity and protection of the community. The bones, transformed by fire into ash and smoke, carried the prayers and offerings of the living up to the other world, creating a bridge of communication between the mortal and divine realms. But Samhain was far more than sacred fires and ancestral communion. It was a night of profound transformation, when the Celtic people themselves became something other than what they were in ordinary time. For this was the night of the great disguising, when mortals donned masks and costumes, not for entertainment, but for survival itself. The practice of wearing disguises during Samhain served as both protection and participation in the supernatural realm that had temporarily merged with the world of the living. The ancient Celts understood that on this night, when malevolent spirits and dangerous otherworldly beings roamed freely through the mortal world, the safest way to move through the darkness was to appear as one of them. By disguising themselves as spirits, demons, or otherworldly creatures, the living could move undetected through a landscape temporarily overrun by supernatural forces. These were not the playful costumes of modern Halloween, but serious magical disguises with life and death implications. To be recognized as human on Samhain night was to risk becoming the target of trickster spirits or malevolent entities seeking to cause harm. The tradition of going door to door in disguise, known as mumming or guising, served both spiritual and social functions within Celtic communities. Disguised individuals would travel from house to house, reciting verses, performing short plays, or telling stories in exchange for food, drink, or small gifts. This practice helped redistribute wealth within the community during a time when resources needed to be carefully managed for the long winter ahead. But it also reinforced the festival's core themes of transformation and liminality, as the disguised visitors embodied the blurring of normal social boundaries that characterized Samhain night. The foods offered during these exchanges were not randomly chosen, but carried deep symbolic significance within the Celtic understanding of the festival. Apples, nuts, and other fruits of the autumn harvest were particularly favored, not just for their seasonal availability, but for their connection to the otherworld in Celtic mythology. Apples, especially, were considered sacred fruits that could provide passage between realms, and the sharing of these foods during Samhain created bonds not just between community members, but between the living and the dead, the mortal world, and the realm of spirits. As the disguised celebrants moved through the darkness, they participated in one of Samhain's most crucial activities, divination. For this was the night when the future could most clearly be seen, when the normal barriers that prevented mortals from glimpsing what was to come had been temporarily lifted. The Celts employed numerous methods of fortune-telling during Samhain, from the casting of stones and the interpretation of dreams to elaborate rituals involving the sacred fires themselves. Young people, especially, would engage in divination practices designed to reveal whom they would marry, how long they would live, or what fortunes awaited them in the coming year. One of the most dramatic forms of Samhain divination involved the sacred bonfires themselves. In 18th century Scotland, participants would lay a ring of stones around the fire, with each stone representing a different person in the community. Throughout the night, celebrants would run around the fire carrying torches, calling out in ecstasy to the spirits and gods. When dawn finally broke, the stones would be carefully examined. Any stone that had been displaced or damaged during the night was believed to indicate that the person it represented would not survive the coming year. This was not mere superstition, but a serious attempt to gain crucial information about the community's future, knowledge that could inform important decisions about resource allocation, marriages, and community planning. The use of nuts and apples in divination practices connected the ritual directly to the harvest season and the abundance that needed to be carefully managed through the dark months ahead. Young women would throw apple peels over their shoulders, believing that the shape the peel formed on the ground would reveal the first letter of their future husband's name. Nuts would be placed in the fire, with their behavior in the flames interpreted as omens about romantic relationships, family fortunes, or community prospects. These practices transformed the simple fruits of the harvest into windows through which the future could be glimpsed. But perhaps the most profound aspect of Samhain divination was its connection to the returning dead. For the Celts believed that the spirits of ancestors, freed from the normal constraints of time and space, could provide guidance and warnings to their living descendants. Families would create elaborate rituals designed to facilitate communication with deceased relatives, seeking advice about everything from agricultural decisions to marriage arrangements. The dead were not silent observers, but active participants in the ongoing life of their communities, and Samhain provided the annual opportunity for this crucial dialogue between past and present. The mythology surrounding Samhain reveals the festival's cosmic significance within the Celtic understanding of the universe. This was not simply a human celebration, but a time when the gods themselves descended to participate in the affairs of mortals. The great deities of the Celtic pantheon were intimately connected to Samhain's observances, with each playing a specific role in the festival's spiritual drama. The Dagda, the All-Father of the Irish gods, would engage in sacred union with the Morrigan, the triple goddess of war, fate, and death, ensuring the fertility and protection of the land through the dark months ahead. The Morrigan herself embodied many of Samhain's most essential themes. As a shapeshifter who could appear as crow, raven, or wolf, she represented the transformative power that characterized the festival. Her dominion over battlefields and her ability to prophesy death made her the perfect deity to oversee a night when the boundary between life and death had dissolved. During Samhain, the Morrigan was believed to walk among mortals, sometimes as a beautiful woman, sometimes as a terrifying hag, testing the courage and wisdom of those she encountered. The presence of Don, the Lord of the Dead in Celtic mythology, added another layer of profound significance to Samhain's spiritual landscape. As the first of the mythical invaders of Ireland to die upon the island's shores, Don had become elevated to the status of ruler over all the deceased. His realm was not a place of punishment or reward, but simply the land where the dead continued their existence. And during Samhain, when the barriers between worlds grew thin, Don's influence extended back into the realm of the living. The fires lit during Samhain served as beacons calling to his domain, while the offerings left for the dead were acknowledgments of his sovereignty over the departed. The mythological stories associated with Samhain reveal the festival's role as a time when extraordinary events were not just possible, but expected. The great heroes of Celtic legend regularly faced their most significant challenges during Samhain night, when the normal rules of reality were suspended and supernatural forces ran wild. Fionn MacCumhail's victory over the fire-breathing demon Eilean, who threatened to burn down the Hall of Tara every Samhain, demonstrated how even the greatest warriors needed special protection and divine aid to survive the dangers of this liminal night. These stories were not mere entertainment, but served as templates for how mortals should approach the festival. They emphasized that Samhain was a time of testing, when individuals would be called upon to demonstrate their courage, wisdom, and spiritual strength. The heroes who succeeded in their Samhain trials emerged transformed, having proven themselves worthy of their legendary status. For ordinary people, the message was clear. Samhain required preparation, respect, and careful adherence to proper ritual practices if one hoped to survive its supernatural challenges. The archaeological evidence from sites like Tlachtga confirms that Samhain was not merely a product of later mythological imagination, but was rooted in genuine ancient practices stretching back thousands of years. Recent excavations at the Hill of Ward have revealed evidence of ceremonial fires dating back 3 millennia, along with the remains of ritual activities that align perfectly with the descriptions found in medieval Irish texts. The discovery of infant remains at the site suggests that the most serious forms of sacrifice may indeed have taken place during these ancient celebrations, offerings made to ensure the survival of the community through the dangerous transition from light to dark. The complex earthworks visible at Tlachtga today represent centuries of continuous use and modification, demonstrating the enduring importance of this sacred site within Celtic religious practice. The fact that the hill continued to serve as a ceremonial centre well into the medieval period, long after the official conversion of Ireland to Christianity, reveals the profound hold that Samhain maintained on the Irish imagination. Even as new religious systems attempted to replace the old ways, the fundamental human needs that Samhain addressed, the necessity of facing death and darkness with courage and community support, remained as powerful as ever. The festival's influence extended far beyond the boundaries of Ireland itself. Throughout the Celtic world, from Scotland to Wales to the furthest reaches of Gaul, variations of Samhain were celebrated with similar themes of ancestral communion, otherworldly contact, and seasonal transition. Each region adapted the core elements to fit local conditions and traditions, but the fundamental structure remained remarkably consistent. A time of preparation, a night of supernatural encounter, and a dawn of renewal and transformation. The arrival of Christianity in Celtic lands marked not the end of Samhain, but its transformation into something both familiar and strange. The early Christian missionaries, led by figures like St. Patrick, initially attempted to suppress what they saw as dangerous pagan practices. But the roots of Samhain ran too deep, its hold on the Celtic soul too profound to be simply cut away by decree or sermon. The festival had answered fundamental human needs for thousands of years, needs that did not disappear with the arrival of a new faith. What emerged instead was one of history's most fascinating examples of religious syncretism, the blending of old and new beliefs into something entirely unique. Rather than destroying Samhain, the Church chose to absorb it, redirecting its spiritual energy into acceptable Christian forms, while preserving many of its essential functions. In the 8th century, Pope Gregory III made a decision that would forever change the trajectory of this ancient festival. He designated November 1st as All Saints' Day, a time to honor the Christian martyrs and saints who had died for their faith. This was not coincidence, but calculated strategy. By placing a major Christian feast day directly over the traditional date of Samhain, the Church sought to provide an alternative focus for the spiritual energies that had for millennia been directed toward communion with the dead and contact with the other world. The evening before All Saints' Day became known as All Hallows' Eve, the direct ancestor of our modern Halloween. Soon after, November 2nd was designated as All Souls' Day, creating a 3-day period that encompassed and transformed the essential elements of the ancient Celtic festival. But this Christian overlay did not erase the deeper currents of Samhain. Instead, it created a complex layering of beliefs and practices that reflected both the persistence of ancient wisdom and the adaptability of human spiritual expression. The Catholic emphasis on remembering the dead, praying for souls in purgatory, and acknowledging the communion of saints resonated deeply with Celtic traditions of ancestral veneration and otherworldly contact. The Christian concept of saints as intermediaries between the mortal and divine worlds echoed the Celtic understanding of spirits and deities who could cross the boundaries between realms. In Ireland especially, this fusion created a unique form of Christianity that retained much of the mystical and supernatural character of the pre-Christian faith. The Irish saints became figures of almost mythological power, capable of miracles that would have been perfectly at home in the stories of the Tuatha De Danann. Holy wells replaced sacred groves, but they served similar functions as places where the supernatural could be encountered and petitions could be made to otherworldly powers. The seasonal rhythms that had governed Celtic religious life continued to shape the Christian calendar, ensuring that the ancient wisdom of seasonal transition remained embedded within the new faith. The common people, those whose lives remained tied to the land and the turning of the seasons, found ways to maintain their ancestral practices within the framework of Christian observance. They continued to light bonfires on All Hallows' Eve, but now they were lighting them in honor of Christian souls rather than pagan spirits. They continued to leave food for the returning dead, but now they were feeding the souls of Christian ancestors rather than the AOC. The costumes and disguises that had once provided protection from malevolent spirits were reinterpreted as ways of honoring saints or depicting biblical figures. This process of transformation reveals something profound about the nature of human spiritual experience. The needs that Samhain had addressed, the necessity of facing death with courage, the importance of maintaining connections with those who had gone before, the recognition that certain times required special spiritual attention. These were not merely Celtic concerns, but universal human experiences. Christianity succeeded in Ireland not by eliminating these needs, but by finding new ways to fulfill them within a Christian framework. The medieval Irish texts that preserve much of our knowledge about ancient Samhain were themselves products of this syncretistic world. Written by Christian monks, who were often the descendants of Druids, these manuscripts reveal a complex relationship with the pagan past. The scribes were careful to frame the old stories within Christian moral frameworks, often adding cautionary notes about the dangers of pagan practices. Yet they preserved the stories themselves with remarkable fidelity, suggesting a deep respect for the wisdom they contained. These texts reveal that even centuries after the official Christianization of Ireland, Samhain continued to be observed with many of its traditional elements intact. The great fires were still lit, though now they were blessed by priests rather than druids. Divination practices continued, though they were often couched in Christian terminology or justified as ways of discerning God's will. The belief in the return of the dead persisted, though now it was understood within the framework of Christian teaching about the afterlife and the communion of saints. The transformation of Samhain also reveals the remarkable adaptability of folk traditions. As political and religious circumstances changed, the festival evolved to meet new conditions while preserving its essential character. When Norman invaders brought new forms of Christianity to Ireland, Samhain adapted again. When English colonial authorities attempted to suppress Irish cultural practices, the festival found ways to survive in hidden or disguised forms. Each generation found ways to pass the essential wisdom of Samhain to the next, ensuring that its insights about death, transformation, and spiritual courage would not be lost. The festival's journey beyond the Celtic world began with the great migrations of Irish people in the 18th and 19th centuries. Driven from their homeland by poverty, famine, and political oppression, millions of Irish emigrants carried their traditions with them to new lands. In America especially, these transplanted traditions would encounter new influences and undergo further transformation. The Irish Halloween customs merged with German, English, and other European traditions to create something new, while still retaining echoes of their ancient Samhain origins. The American transformation of Halloween demonstrates both the persistence and the malleability of ancient traditions. The core elements of Samhain, the focus on death and the supernatural, the use of costumes and disguises, the practice of going door to door seeking treats, all of these survived the Atlantic crossing and found new expression in the New World. But they also adapted to new circumstances, incorporating influences from other cultures and responding to the unique conditions of American life. The jack-o'-lantern, perhaps the most recognizable symbol of modern Halloween, illustrates this process of cultural evolution perfectly. The carved pumpkin has its roots in the Irish tradition of carving turnips and potatoes to create lanterns for All Hallows' Eve. These carved vegetables served both practical and spiritual purposes, providing light for those moving through the darkness and creating frightening faces meant to ward off evil spirits. When Irish immigrants arrived in America, they discovered that pumpkins, native to the New World, were far easier to carve than turnips and made much more impressive lanterns. The transformation of the jack-o'-lantern from turnip to pumpkin represents in miniature the entire process by which Samhain became Halloween. The essential function remained the same, creating light in darkness and protection from supernatural threats, but the form adapted to new circumstances and available materials. This pattern of functional continuity within formal innovation characterizes the entire evolution of Halloween from its ancient Celtic roots. The Victorian era marked another crucial phase in Halloween's development as the festival became increasingly domesticated and commercialized. The dangerous supernatural encounters that had characterized ancient Samhain were gradually replaced by more controlled and predictable forms of entertainment. Ghost stories became parlor games, divination practices became party tricks, and the awesome power of the returning dead was transformed into the manageable thrill of costumed children asking for candy. Yet even in its most commercialized forms, Halloween retained something of its ancient power. The fascination with death and the supernatural that drives modern Halloween celebrations echoes the same human needs that led our ancestors to light fires on Samhain night and welcome the returning dead into their homes. The costumes that allow us to become something other than ourselves for one night carry forward the transformative magic that was central to the ancient Celtic festival. The tradition of telling ghost stories and watching horror movies during Halloween season maintains the connection to the other world that was Samhain's defining characteristic. The modern celebration of Halloween also preserves, in however transformed a fashion, the ancient understanding that certain times require special attention to the supernatural and the uncanny. October 31st remains a night when the normal rules seem suspended, when the impossible feels possible, and when we allow ourselves to encounter fears and mysteries that we carefully avoid the rest of the year. The fact that Halloween has survived and thrived in an increasingly secular and scientific world suggests that it continues to fulfill deep psychological and spiritual needs that have remained constant across millennia. The contemporary revival of interest in Celtic spirituality and pagan traditions has brought new attention to Samhain's ancient origins. Modern practitioners of Wicca and other neo-pagan religions have attempted to reconstruct and revive the original Celtic practices, though their understanding of these ancient traditions is necessarily filtered through centuries of change and limited historical sources. These modern celebrations of Samhain often emphasize the festival's themes of death and rebirth, ancestral honoring, and seasonal transition, attempting to recapture something of the spiritual intensity that characterized the original Celtic observances. Archaeological discoveries continue to shed new light on the ancient practices that gave birth to Halloween. Recent excavations at sites like Tlachtka have provided tangible evidence of the ritual activities described in medieval texts, confirming that the literary sources preserve genuine memories of ancient practices. The discovery of cremated human remains and evidence of massive ritual fires dating back thousands of years demonstrates that Samhain was indeed a festival of profound spiritual significance, involving forms of sacrifice and otherworldly communication that we are only beginning to understand. The scientific study of ancient DNA and isotope analysis has also begun to reveal new details about the people who celebrated the original Samhain. Evidence suggests that the Celtic festivals brought together communities from vast distances, with people traveling hundreds of miles to participate in the great gatherings at sacred sites. This paints a picture of Samhain not as a local village celebration, but as a coordinated spiritual event that unified entire regions in shared ritual observance. The festival served not only spiritual needs, but also crucial social functions, providing opportunities for trade, marriage negotiations, and the maintenance of political alliances across tribal boundaries. The persistence of Halloween in the modern world, its ability to adapt and survive across cultures and centuries, testifies to the profound wisdom embedded within the ancient Celtic understanding of seasonal transition and spiritual transformation. In our contemporary celebration of Halloween, however commercialized and sanitized it may have become, we continue to participate in one of humanity's oldest and most enduring spiritual traditions. We continue to acknowledge, if only for one night each year, that there are mysteries beyond our understanding and forces that operate outside the boundaries of ordinary experience. The story of Samhain's transformation into Halloween reveals something essential about the nature of human spiritual experience and the persistence of ancient wisdom in new forms. It demonstrates that the deepest insights about life, death, and the sacred dimensions of existence cannot be easily eliminated by changing religious or political systems. Instead, they find new expressions, adapt to new circumstances, and continue to serve the fundamental human need to find meaning in the face of mortality and mystery. The transformation of Samhain into the modern Halloween we know today was not a sudden rupture, but a gradual metamorphosis spanning centuries, driven by waves of cultural change that swept across the Western world. As Irish immigrants poured into America during the 19th century, fleeing the devastation of the Great Famine and the oppression of English colonial rule, they carried with them not just their hopes for a better life, but the sacred memories of their ancestors. These were people who had been shaped by generations of Samhain observance, whose very souls carried the imprint of ancient fires and otherworldly encounters. But America was not Ireland. The vast forests and endless prairies of the New World held different spirits, different energies. The Irish found themselves in a land where their ancient practices had to compete with the traditions of German immigrants who brought their own harvest festivals, with English customs that emphasized order and propriety, and with the peculiar American genius for transforming everything it touched into something uniquely its own. The result was a fascinating cultural alchemy that would produce something neither fully ancient nor entirely modern. The process began in the immigrant communities of the eastern seaboard, where Irish families gathered in tenements and boarding houses to recreate the festivals of their homeland. They carved turnips and potatoes as their ancestors had done, creating flickering lanterns to ward off the malevolent spirits that might have followed them across the Atlantic. But turnips were expensive in America, and the Irish immigrants, struggling to survive in their new homeland, had to make do with whatever they could find. It was in this context that they discovered the pumpkin, a Native American plant that the indigenous peoples had been cultivating for thousands of years. The pumpkin was larger than any turnip, easier to carve, and available in abundance during the autumn harvest season. When the Irish immigrants began carving faces into these orange gourds, they created one of the most enduring symbols of Halloween. But they also created something more, a perfect metaphor for the entire process of cultural adaptation, showing how ancient practices could take root in new soil and flourish in forms their creators never could have imagined. The carved pumpkin, which Americans would come to call the jack-o'-lantern, carried within its orange shell the entire history of Samhain's transformation. The light that flickered within represented the sacred fires that had burned at Tlachtga 3,000 years earlier. The grotesque face carved into its surface echoed the masks worn by Celtic celebrants to disguise themselves from malevolent spirits. The practice of placing these lanterns in windows and doorways continued the ancient tradition of marking safe spaces during the dangerous night when the boundary between worlds grew thin. As Halloween spread beyond the Irish immigrant communities, it encountered the broader American culture of the 19th century, a culture that was rapidly industrializing and increasingly disconnected from the agricultural rhythms that had given birth to festivals like Samhain. The ancient understanding of seasonal transition as a matter of spiritual life and death began to fade, replaced by a more sanitized appreciation of autumn's beauty and harvest abundance. The fearsome supernatural encounters that had characterized Celtic Samhain were gradually transformed into entertainments suitable for parlor gatherings and community celebrations. Victorian America, with its complex relationship between scientific rationalism and romantic spiritualism, proved to be the perfect cultural laboratory for Halloween's continued evolution. The middle-class families of this era were fascinated by the supernatural, but they wanted to encounter it in controlled, predictable ways that would not threaten their sense of social order or religious propriety. The seances and ghost stories that became popular during this period represented a domesticated version of the otherworldly contact that had been central to ancient Samhain. The Halloween parties that became fashionable in Victorian parlours transformed the ancient divination practices of the Celts into genteel party games. Young women would still peel apples to divine the names of their future husbands, but now they did so in well-lit drawing rooms, surrounded by friends and family, rather than in the flickering shadows of sacred groves. The nuts that had once been cast into ritual fires to reveal the future were now used in parlor games, designed more for amusement than for genuine spiritual insight. Yet something of the ancient power remained, even in these transformed contexts. The Victorian fascination with death and mourning created a cultural atmosphere that was surprisingly receptive to Halloween's themes of mortality and otherworldly contact. The elaborate mourning rituals of the era, the popularity of spiritualism and mediumship, the Gothic literature that dominated the literary landscape, all of these phenomena reflected a deep cultural need to grapple with questions of death and the afterlife that echoed the concerns that had driven ancient Samhain observances. The transformation of Halloween continued to accelerate as America moved into the 20th century. The festival that had once marked the most dangerous night of the year gradually became associated primarily with children and harmless fun. The trick-or-treating tradition, which had its roots in the ancient Celtic practice of going door to door in disguise, evolved into a standardized ritual in which costumed children would visit houses in their neighborhoods, seeking candy and treats. This shift toward a child-centered celebration reflected broader changes in American society, including new understandings of childhood as a distinct phase of life requiring special protection and nurturing. The dangerous spiritual encounters of ancient Samhain were deemed inappropriate for young minds, but the excitement and magic of transformation through costume remained perfectly suitable for children's entertainment. Halloween became a way for American children to safely explore themes of fear, death, and the supernatural within the protective boundaries of community supervision. The commercialization of Halloween accelerated dramatically during the 20th century, as American businesses discovered the profit potential in a festival that required specialized costumes, decorations, and treats. The candy companies that emerged during this period transformed trick-or-treating from a practice rooted in ancient traditions of hospitality and community reciprocity into a massive commercial enterprise. The costumes that had once carried profound spiritual significance became mass-produced consumer products designed more for visual impact than for any deeper meaning. Yet even in its most commercialized forms, Halloween retained something of its ancient essence. The fascination with monsters and supernatural creatures that drives modern Halloween celebrations reflects the same human need to confront and master our fears that led our ancestors to light fires on Samhain night. The tradition of telling scary stories and watching horror movies during Halloween season maintains a connection to the otherworldly encounters that were central to the Celtic festival. The practice of decorating homes with images of skeletons, ghosts, and other symbols of death preserves, however unconsciously, the ancient understanding that this is a time when mortality must be acknowledged and confronted. The horror movie industry that flourished in 20th century America found in Halloween the perfect promotional opportunity, releasing their most frightening films during October and creating an association between the festival and manufactured fear that would have been recognizable to the ancient Celts. The movie theaters that showed these films during Halloween season served a function similar to the sacred groves where Celtic Druids had once told stories of supernatural encounters. Both provided controlled environments where communities could gather to explore their deepest fears and anxieties in the safety of shared experience. The costume tradition that became central to American Halloween celebrations carried forward one of the most important aspects of ancient Samhain, the power of transformation. The ability to become someone or something else for one night continued to fulfill deep psychological needs that had driven the Celtic practice of disguise. Children who put on costumes during Halloween were participating, however unknowingly, in the same transformative magic that had allowed their ancestors to move safely through a world temporarily overrun by supernatural forces. The evolution of Halloween costumes themselves tells the story of American culture's changing relationship with the supernatural and the sacred. The early Irish immigrant costumes had been designed to frighten away evil spirits, featuring grotesque masks and otherworldly appearances that would have been at home in ancient Celtic festivals. As Halloween became more commercialized and child-centered, the costumes evolved to include not just supernatural creatures, but also popular culture figures, occupational uniforms, and fantasy characters drawn from literature and entertainment. This expansion of costume possibilities reflected a broader cultural shift away from the specifically religious or spiritual themes that had characterized ancient Samhain toward a more general celebration of imagination and creative expression. Yet the core function remained the same. Halloween continued to provide an annual opportunity for ordinary people to experiment with different identities, to explore aspects of themselves that were normally hidden or suppressed, and to experience the liberating power of transformation. The neighborhood trick-or-treating tradition that became standard in American suburbs during the mid-20th century created new forms of community bonding that echoed the social functions of ancient Samhain. The practice required cooperation between neighbors, established traditions of generosity and hospitality, and created shared experiences that strengthened community ties. Children who went trick-or-treating learned important social skills, including how to interact with strangers, how to show gratitude for gifts received, and how to participate in collective celebrations. The decorating of homes for Halloween became another way that modern communities maintained connection to the festival's ancient themes. The jack-o'-lanterns that glowed in windows served the same function as the sacred fires that had once burned on Celtic hilltops, marking safe spaces and providing protection against malevolent forces. The artificial spider webs, plastic skeletons, and other spooky decorations that became popular during the late 20th century transformed entire neighborhoods into theatrical sets where the themes of death and the supernatural could be safely explored. The timing of modern Halloween, maintaining the ancient date of October 31st, preserved the festival's connection to the seasonal rhythms that had given birth to Samhain. Even in an increasingly urbanized society where most people had little direct connection to agricultural cycles, the approach of winter continued to evoke deep psychological responses that made Halloween's themes of death and darkness particularly resonant. The shortening days and cooling temperatures of late October created a natural atmosphere of mystery and foreboding that enhanced the festival's supernatural elements. The modern celebration of Halloween in America also maintained, in however transformed a fashion, the ancient Celtic understanding that certain times require special attention to the realm beyond ordinary experience. October 31st remained a night when the normal rules of social behavior were suspended, when adults could act like children and children could explore adult themes, when the boundaries between fantasy and reality became deliberately blurred. This liminal quality connected modern Halloween directly to its ancient roots in the Celtic understanding of Samhain as a threshold time when anything was possible. The global spread of American-style Halloween during the late 20th and early 21st centuries represented another phase in the festival's long evolution. As American popular culture spread around the world through movies, television, and commercial products, Halloween celebrations began appearing in countries that had no historical connection to Celtic traditions. These new Halloween celebrations often emphasized the commercial and entertainment aspects of the festival, while losing much of its deeper cultural and spiritual significance. Yet even in these globalized forms, Halloween continued to serve important psychological and social functions. The festival provided communities around the world with an opportunity to explore themes of death and the supernatural that were often suppressed in their daily lives. The costume traditions allowed people to experiment with different identities and express aspects of themselves that were normally hidden. The community celebrations associated with Halloween created opportunities for social bonding and collective fun that strengthened local communities. The contemporary revival of interest in Celtic spirituality and pagan traditions has brought new attention to Halloween's ancient origins and led some people to attempt to reclaim the festival's deeper spiritual significance. Modern practitioners of neo-pagan religions often celebrate Samhain as one of their most important festivals, emphasizing themes of death and rebirth, ancestral honoring, and seasonal transition. These contemporary Samhain celebrations attempt to recreate something of the spiritual intensity that characterized the ancient Celtic festival, though they are necessarily influenced by modern perspectives and limited historical knowledge. Archaeological discoveries continue to provide new insights into the ancient practices that gave birth to Halloween, revealing details about Celtic religious life that help us understand the original significance of Samhain. Recent excavations at sacred sites throughout the former Celtic world have uncovered evidence of ritual activities, ceremonial fires, and religious practices that confirm many of the descriptions found in medieval Irish texts. These discoveries help bridge the gap between the mythological accounts of ancient Samhain and the historical reality of Celtic religious practice. The study of modern Halloween celebrations through the lens of anthropology and folklore studies has also revealed the remarkable persistence of ancient patterns within contemporary practices. Scholars have identified elements of Halloween that can be traced directly back to Celtic Samhain, demonstrating the continuity of human spiritual needs across millennia. The festival's emphasis on transformation, its focus on death and the supernatural, its creation of temporary communities bound together by shared ritual experience, all of these characteristics connect modern Halloween to its ancient roots. The environmental movement of the late 20th century brought new appreciation for the seasonal rhythms that had originally given meaning to festivals like Samhain. As people became more aware of their connection to the natural world and the importance of living in harmony with seasonal cycles, some began to rediscover the ecological wisdom embedded in ancient Celtic festivals. Modern celebrations of Halloween that emphasize connection to the natural world, appreciation for the harvest season, and awareness of seasonal transition represent attempts to recover some of the environmental consciousness that characterized the original Samhain observances. The digital age has created new possibilities for Halloween celebration and community building, with online communities forming around shared interests in the festival's history, traditions, and contemporary expressions. Social media platforms have become venues for sharing Halloween costumes, decorations, and celebrations, creating virtual communities that span geographical boundaries. The internet has also made it easier for people interested in the ancient origins of Halloween to access historical information, archaeological discoveries, and scholarly research about Celtic religion and culture. Yet for all the changes that Halloween has undergone during its long journey from ancient Samhain to modern celebration, certain core elements have remained remarkably constant. The festival continues to provide an annual opportunity for communities to come together in celebration of transformation, mystery, and the supernatural. It continues to serve as a time when normal social boundaries are suspended and people can explore aspects of themselves that are usually hidden. Most importantly, it continues to fulfill the fundamental human need to confront and master our fears about death, the unknown, and the forces that operate beyond our understanding. The story of Halloween's evolution from Samhain reveals something profound about the nature of cultural transmission and the persistence of ancient wisdom in new forms. It demonstrates that the deepest human insights about life, death, and the sacred dimensions of existence cannot be easily eliminated by changing circumstances or belief systems. Instead, they adapt, evolve, and find new expressions that allow them to continue serving essential human needs across generations and cultures. In our contemporary celebration of Halloween, we participate in one of humanity's oldest continuous traditions, a festival that has survived the rise and fall of empires, the transformation of religious systems, and the radical changes brought by industrialization and globalization. When we carve pumpkins, don costumes, or tell ghost stories on Halloween night, We join our voices to a conversation that began around Celtic fires 3,000 years ago, a conversation about the meaning of life and death, the nature of transformation, and the courage required to face the unknown. The ancient Celts who first celebrated Samhain could never have imagined that their sacred festival would one day be celebrated by millions of people around the world, that their ritual fires would be remembered in the glow of electric jack-o'-lanterns, or that their practices of otherworldly communion would live on in the ghost stories and horror movies of the modern age. Yet in some fundamental sense, they would recognize in our Halloween celebrations the same human needs and spiritual insights that drove their own observances of the night when the veil between worlds grew thin. Halloween endures because it speaks to something eternal in the human experience, something that transcends the boundaries of culture, religion, and historical period. It reminds us that we are all part of a great cosmic drama that includes both life and death, light and darkness, the known and the unknown. It teaches us that transformation is possible, that fear can be conquered, and that even in the darkest times, community and courage can see us through. As we stand on the threshold of yet another Halloween, preparing once again to light our jack-o'-lanterns and don our costumes, we would do well to remember the profound legacy we have inherited from our Celtic ancestors. Their gift to us is not just a fun holiday for children or a profitable season for retailers, but a living tradition that continues to offer wisdom about how to face the mysteries of existence with courage, creativity, and hope. In celebrating Halloween, we celebrate not just the supernatural and the spooky, but the enduring power of human community to transform fear into joy, darkness into light, and death itself into the promise of renewal and rebirth. The festival's journey from the sacred groves of ancient Ireland to the suburban streets of modern America represents more than mere cultural evolution. It reveals the profound human capacity to preserve essential truths even as their outer forms undergo radical transformation. When we examine Halloween through this lens, we begin to understand that what we are witnessing is not the death of an ancient tradition, but its remarkable ability to speak across millennia to needs that remain as urgent today as they were for our Celtic ancestors. Consider the modern child who stands before their mirror on October 31st, carefully applying makeup to transform themselves into a ghost, a witch, or some creature from the realm of nightmares. In that moment of transformation, they are participating in the same fundamental act of magic that drove their ancestors to don masks and animal skins on Samhain night. The specific forms have changed, the materials have evolved, but the essential human experience remains identical. Both the ancient Celt and the modern child understand, perhaps without conscious thought, that there are times when we must become something other than ourselves to safely navigate the mysteries that surround us. The psychology underlying this transformation reveals layers of meaning that connect Halloween directly to its ancient roots. When we put on a costume, we are not simply playing dress-up or engaging in harmless fun. We are accessing one of humanity's most ancient and powerful tools for psychological growth and spiritual development. The mask has always been a sacred technology, a device for exploring aspects of the self that remain hidden in ordinary consciousness. The Halloween costume serves this same function, allowing us to experiment with different identities, to explore our shadow selves, and to confront fears and desires that we normally keep carefully contained. The modern fascination with horror movies during Halloween season represents another direct continuation of ancient Samhain practices. The movie theaters where we gather to watch tales of ghosts, demons, and supernatural encounters serve the same function that the sacred fires served for our Celtic ancestors. They provide a controlled environment where communities can come together to face their deepest fears and explore the mysteries that lie beyond the boundaries of ordinary experience. The shared screams and nervous laughter that echo through these darkened theaters create the same bonds of communal courage that once united Celtic villages during their night of supernatural encounter. The stories themselves have evolved in form, but retained their essential function. Where the ancient Celts told tales of heroes confronting otherworldly beings on Samhain night, we now watch films about ordinary people facing supernatural threats. The specific monsters may have changed from Celtic spirits to movie vampires, from shape-shifting gods to Hollywood zombies, but the underlying narrative structure remains remarkably consistent. These are still stories about courage in the face of the unknown, about the thin line between life and death, and about the power of community to overcome even the most terrifying supernatural threats. The contemporary practice of decorating homes for Halloween reveals another layer of continuity with ancient traditions. When families transform their houses into haunted mansions, complete with artificial fog, recorded screams, and mechanical monsters, they are creating something remarkably similar to the transformed landscape that characterized ancient Samhain celebrations. They are marking their territory as a space where the supernatural is not only acknowledged, but welcomed, where the normal rules of reality are temporarily suspended in favor of something more mysterious and magical. The jack-o'-lanterns that glow in windows across America on Halloween night carry within their carved faces the memory of every sacred fire that has ever been lit to ward off the darkness. Each flickering candle represents humanity's eternal defiance against the forces of chaos and destruction, our refusal to surrender to the night without a fight. The grotesque grins carved into these pumpkins echo the masks worn by Celtic warriors as they prepared to face the unknown, expressions of fierce joy in the face of cosmic terror. The neighborhood trick-or-treating tradition has created new forms of ritual that would be instantly recognizable to ancient Celtic communities. The practice of going door to door in disguise, seeking offerings from neighbors, creates temporary bonds between strangers that mirror the community solidarity that was essential for surviving the dangerous transition of Samhain night. Children who trick-or-treat learn important lessons about reciprocity, generosity, and the mutual dependence that binds communities together in times of uncertainty. The candy that has become central to modern Halloween celebrations might seem like a purely commercial innovation, but it serves deeper functions that connect it to the ancient practice of leaving offerings for returning spirits. The sweets that homeowners distribute to costumed visitors represent the same impulse toward hospitality and appeasement that led Celtic families to set extra places at their dinner tables for deceased relatives. Both practices acknowledge that there are forces beyond our immediate family or community that require recognition and respect if we hope to maintain harmony between the worlds. The timing of modern Halloween parties and celebrations, concentrated around the weekend closest to October 31st, creates temporary communities that echo the great gatherings that characterized ancient Samhain observances. These parties bring together people who might otherwise have little contact with one another, creating bonds forged in the shared experience of transformation and supernatural encounter. The office Halloween party, the neighborhood block party, the school carnival, all of these modern institutions serve the same social functions that the great Samhain fires served for Celtic communities 3,000 years ago. The global spread of Halloween during the late 20th and early 21st centuries represents something more significant than mere cultural imperialism or commercial expansion. It demonstrates that the needs addressed by this ancient festival are truly universal human needs, not merely the peculiar concerns of one particular culture or historical period. When Halloween celebrations began appearing in countries as diverse as Japan, Brazil, and Nigeria, they were filling genuine psychological and spiritual voids that existed within those cultures, providing outlets for the exploration of death, transformation, and supernatural encounter that every human society requires. The resistance that Halloween has sometimes encountered in these new cultural contexts reveals the continued power of its ancient themes. Religious authorities who object to Halloween celebrations often do so because they recognize, perhaps unconsciously, that the festival carries within it challenges to conventional religious authority that echo its pre-Christian origins. The supernatural encounters promoted by Halloween, the emphasis on direct personal transformation, the celebration of mystery and the unknown, all of these elements represent alternatives to institutionalized religious experience that can feel threatening to established spiritual hierarchies. And so, as we return from our journey through the mists of time, we carry with us the knowledge that Halloween is far more than plastic decorations and candy-filled bags. It is the living memory of our ancestors' deepest wisdom, a thread that connects us across 3,000 years to the sacred fires of Samhain night. When you next hear the laughter of costumed children or see the flicker of a jack-o'-lantern's flame, remember that you are witnessing the continuation of humanity's most ancient conversation with mystery itself. The veil between worlds still grows thin each October 31st, and we still gather in the darkness to light fires against the night.